What's going on, everyone? Adam Gelman here. Another video, another awesome panel discussion we've got teed up here tonight. We are taping the night of before SmackDown, leading into Fastlane this weekend. This is probably going to air next week, so some of the things may have some developments over the course of the next couple of days as we tape here. But I've got a couple of guys here that I love talking with about wrestling cards. My partner in crime, Ryan Shear, you're on every one of the videos, kind of beyond introductions with you at this point, right?
Yeah, well, for those of you who don't know, Ryan Shear, aka the Doug Basham lookalike, apparently from Wrestlers on Netflix. I've gotten that a couple times. So you can find me on Instagram at Non-Sport Showcase.
Awesome. And my buddy Ben Johnson here. Ben, you want to introduce yourself? Tell them where they can find you, especially for your eBay store. I know that's a big connection that you have to wrestling cards. How have you been, my friend?
I'm good. My name's Ben. I enjoy wrestling, have for 35 years, and I enjoy wrestling cards. And I do a lot of buying and selling and trading of wrestling cards. So I'm around.
Yeah, man. He is the famous 825 on eBay, sometimes infamous, if you want to know. But yeah, I think the reason I wanted to have Ben on here is because he has kind of a unique seller perspective, but he was also probably one of the most prolific tops buyers and sellers of WWE cards during their more recent runs. And that's where he and I got together and got to know each other over the last few years. And I've loved having him on a couple of these videos. He really does bring a unique perspective. So welcome back. Glad to have you on again.
Appreciate it.
So I want to start. Ryan and I have done a video already where we've sort of broken down our reactions to what's been going on with the licensed fanatics taking over the hobby and their Thanos plan, as you and I have sort of texted back and forth around. When you saw Topps, when you saw WWE and Panini sort of going to battle at court, canceling licenses, what was your initial reaction? Because I know you've had a lot of experience in the hobby over the last few years, and just curious what your initial reaction was.
I mean, it was a foregone conclusion that it was going to happen. I went against the grain and thought it was going to happen quicker than most people did. I didn't know that it was going to happen this quick. I did hear a little video from Michael Rubin that didn't really get out there very much. He had done an interview on some little show, and he was talking about licenses that was coming up. And he said UFC January 1st, 2024. And then immediately after that, he mentioned WWE. And it wasn't in the same sentence, but he alluded to the fact that WWE was coming back over in January 1st. And I text that to you, and we couldn't really make complete sense of it. And then I guess it was 2 weeks later, the WWE filed suit against Panini. And so I think it was a little Easter egg that was thrown out there, maybe.
And that's really interesting because the license was actually going to go through 2025. So whatever information he was acting on in the document that has been made public around their license, they had years left on that deal. This is kind of the interesting little Easter egg you found.
Yeah, and on top of that, if you look at that court document was said that they breached it like 2 or 3 weeks before it was released to the public. So maybe he was just talking out of. Anywho, eventually Topps is getting the license back. We knew that from day one. Panini got the license, and the news broke that Fanatics would get it back. So it was like, okay, you get a temporary license. What Panini did is honestly they hit a grand slam, and they did really well, and it brought a lot of new collectors, a lot of new buyers, a lot of new sellers into wrestling cards. And I think a lot of people have kind of forgotten about Topps. Topps made some good cards. Are they going to see a comeback? I don't know. Maybe. There was a big run on Topps Chrome for a while, the old Topps Chrome. There was a big run on Transcendent, and outside of that, people have focused strictly on Panini and haven't looked at the older stuff.
Yep.
I think
it's an interesting sort of situation. I know Ryan and I have discussed this on videos. Ryan, when you are looking at kind of what Ben is saying, and you see the legacy of what this last 18-month period will be from an extended period of time, what if we're 5 years in the future and we're looking back on this time, what do you think Panini's legacy is going to be in wrestling cards?
I think it's going to be extremely strong. I almost liken it to like Terrell Davis's career, where he played 5 solid years and had 2 Super Bowls and an MVP. And I think he had a league MVP and the Hall of Fame. You know, you don't need to have longevity to make an impact, and this is definitely what we've seen here. The products came in hot and heavy. They've been really well received for the most part, especially Select, and then some of the on card stuff with Immaculate. I wish we could have seen more, but it looks like we're not. But I think the last 18 months, 2 years have been really strong, and I think people are going to look back on it, like you said, in 3 to 4 or 5 years from now, and say it was really a good time. But it'll also depend on what Topps comes out with, because if Topps comes out strong, it's always, what have you done for me lately? And so
Yep.
if Topps comes out strong with some really great products that really put them over, then they're going to say, yeah, Panini was a nice time. They had some good stuff. I really, it was kind of cool, but Topps is here and Topps is doing really well. If Top fumbles the bag, people are going to be like, Panini should be here. Panini was better. Everything's reactionary. So
Yeah.
we'll see what happens when Topps makes their play. So, but I also think you're going to see in 3, 4, 5 years, a lot of the really rare Panini stuff is going to dry up. And like, for instance, with wrestlers that were in 1 year of a set and not another one, like Macho Man and Prism this year, but he wasn't in last year, so he's really limited on some of the stuff you can get at him. You're going to see player collectors squirreling that stuff away, and when it pops up, it's going to be very, very expensive. So, but like I said, it's reactionary to what Topps does. So,
yeah, that's a good point. And I think I was listening to Sports Card Nation just for or Sports Card Nonsense, I'm sorry, just to see what their reaction was, because they're kind of like the overarching hobby podcast that sort of exists outside the content bubble that we're sort
I
of
like
living
them.
in.
That's a really strong podcast. I like those guys. I really
And
enjoy that podcast.
yeah, and they said that no one cares who makes the wrestling cards. They just want to buy wrestling cards where they're available. But Ben brought up a really good point, and I want to go back to that, because he said people have really been laser focused on the Panini stuff, and I would agree. I mean, like, sure, there's some vintage stuff that has been going off the charts and stuff. I think that's just sort of an always going to happen. That's happened in baseball. That's happened in football and basketball. Like, vintage will always have a place in the hobby. Where I don't think that Topps has really done a good job is that over these last, sort of 3 years before they lost the license in 21, it was a really, really small sort of focus area on certain wrestlers. But their products like Finest and Chrome and On Transcendent and all those things, they were so, so good. I think it's hard to look back at that time negatively, because I had such a fun time collecting Topps wrestling cards. Like, if you look at my shelf, like, I've said this on a few videos, like, there's a ton of Topps stuff on there because they made great wrestling cards. So to the degree where, does it really matter who's making the cards? I think it kind of does, from the sense of like what the audience is and bringing new people in, as Ben was saying. But man, like, I think every area of the hobby has its ups and downs, and we're going to cover that in this video. I think that was kind of the focus of why I wanted to get you guys together.
As a side note, I truly believe, and you can't tell me any differently, that Panini's IP, whether it be Immaculate, National Treasures, Prism, all that, is eventually going to end up in the hands of fanatics. So even if this old stuff dries up, I think you're going to see 2027 Fanatics Immaculate wrestling.
That would be cool.
No, I mean, I you can't tell me that it's not going to happen. That IP is not going to just die. I mean, every other card IP over the course of history has been absorbed by another manufacturer.
Somebody, yeah. That we just saw what happens when Upper Deck absorbed the PMGs and stuff from Skybox and the Fleer stuff. Like, it's a very cyclical sort of situation.
You talk about something that, late 90s Skybox basketball, that exists as like a holy grail for a lot of people. And it was a very short window. And so I get exactly what Ryan was saying. But then Upper Deck has kind of hoarded out over the last few years and put it PMGs and all the other stuff.
Literally everything, yeah.
Everything, because that's what sells the products.
Yeah.
But
the nostalgia,
the IP is most likely not going away. Unless Panini literally just takes their ball like Stone Cold and goes home and just buries it in a vault forever. I mean,
let's hope that doesn't happen.
I think we can see something interesting that let's say that does happen in 3 years or 4 years. Let's say just like 2027, just to throw a number out there. You will see renewed interest in the 2 years of the original Panini.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely.
So
People
if they
want the
come out,
first.
if they come out with 2027 Revolution with Galactics, you're going to see a renewed interest in the Galactics from now.
Yeah.
Select Blacks, Prism Blacks, Prism Gold. I mean, Fanatics Prism Gold is not, that's not unheard of. I agree with you. I think eventually they're going to have everything, and we're going to see this stuff again. And once this newer stuff comes out in 2027 or 2028 or 2030 or whenever, you're going to see renewed interest where people go back and say, okay, I got to get the original stuff now.
I mean, look at so the PMGs originally started back in the late 90s. There was a period of time where Skybox was dead. It took a very recent sort of push from people from Upper Deck to really reinforce the importance of those PMG cards. I don't personally like them, but it's something that is a hobby mainstay over the boom period because, like you said, people went back and said, I want the original PMGs. Now that Michael Jordan Green is $1 million card or whatever, the Kobe Bryant's, the NFL stuff, all that different stuff is exactly that. So I agree with you 100% there. Let's look at this from the perspective of like what Panini has done. We're gonna go company by company. So each company is gonna get their own spotlight. Let's start with the things that Panini has done really, really well.
Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and steal some of Ben's thunder here and say that Panini brought in wrestling collectors who normally would not have played in this sandbox. Prism fans, they came for Prism WWE, and that brought in new people outside of the normal circle. They really hit a home run. I mean, over the last 2 years, they did a great job. It's like I said on previous videos, whoever designed these sets gave a shit. Like they actually cared. They cared. They designed these sets, and I think it was such a fresh take to have Panini put all the 2022 Prism drama aside. we had gotten complacent with Topps over the 2 or 3 years leading up to them losing the license because they were really kind of cookie cuttering stuff, and I think it got boring after a while and it got stale. And then Panini came in with a bunch of fresh stuff we hadn't seen before in WWE and brought a lot of people back, and I think they're going to stay because of that. So
that's a really good point. I think the challenge that Panini had coming in was that they had really never been a wrestling card manufacturer, right? They were never they'd never done this before. They literally came in and said, we're just going to do our greatest hits. And I think WWE benefited from that exceptionally well because they didn't have to put up with the 40 or so sets that Panini's putting out for football or basketball and get all the garbage that goes along. We got the 10 or 8 or 10 best sets that they had to offer. And I think you're how they brought in a bunch of new people, all that stuff. Ben, what about you? What are some of the things that you wanted to talk about?
The point I'll make is this. You haven't made it in this world in pop culture or whatever until you have a lot of haters, right?
That's a good point.
All right. So wrestling cards, we existed in a tiny little bubble. There wasn't much hatred because people are like, oh, they collect wrestling cards. Cool, whatever, do your thing. Prism 22 came out and there were thousands of haters everywhere you turned. Everybody was hating on Prism. That means wrestling cards had made it. And after that, Panini doubled down and they made some of the best wrestling cards I've honestly ever seen. The photography, I'm sure we'll talk about that tons of times, the best photography period in wrestling cards ever. They did the best they could in terms of getting people to sign that don't normally sign or don't sign a lot. That's a double-edged sword, but it did bring a lot of
like old ECW guys. Like they were bringing in people that I would never thought would ever sign another wrestling card.
Blue Meanie got a card. I thought that was awesome.
Al Snow, he's now around the Wrestlers documentary, but he got a bunch of cards.
So, they've done a really good job. And honestly, I thought like with all that hatred with Prism, boxes went up to $1,200 or whatever, and then they came crashing down like nothing I had ever seen. I mean, it was the biggest roller coaster ever. And so all the hatred came out. Panini doubled down, and they just stuck their nose to the grind and kept making great product after great product. There was, I mean, even NXT was not terribly bad. It was supposed to be
on card.
It was supposed to be a $50, $60 a box product, which is what it was. And for what it was, they had on-card autos from Roman Reigns, Alexa Bliss. I mean, I'm just thinking off the top of my head what was in there, but I mean, it truly was not a bad product.
LA Knight, isn't LA Knight in that set too?
Yeah. I bet he is.
Yeah,
he is. Yeah.
So Immaculate, and I bought more Immaculate than I have of, well, second more than most of any product ever. I think I bought 14 cases of Immaculate, and if I could do it again and win the lottery, I'd buy 200 cases of that stuff. Funnest wrestling product ever. You never knew what you were going to get out of that. And as simple as it was and as goofy as it was to cut up the little shirts and stuff, those were the coolest patch cards wrestling has ever seen and probably will ever see.
That's a really interesting point, because like it's a roadmap, and that's where I think the next phase of wrestling cards will be able to draw on what Panini showed is possible in wrestling cards. Like, we had no idea that the stuff in Immaculate was ever going to be something that we could expect, right? Those gigantic patch cards with the faces and all the other shit that was on there, like, man, that was so cool to have. And there's still, like, everybody has those to be, like, even if it's like Kofi Kingston or anybody else, like, there were some insanely awesome looking cards that came out in that set. It provides a roadmap for the future where maybe we get Topps Dynasty Wrestling. Maybe we get stuff that Topps would not have had the roadmap to do, but now sees that it's a possibility thanks to Panini opening those doors. Because historically, Topps was matte relics, and maybe they got a few shirts here and there, but it was all stuff that was very single color, very boring relics. And sure, it may mean something, like you said, like to have that Panini card that you've always wanted to see possible in wrestling. Like, that was always the thing that I think I would drew me into things like Prism and Select and all those things. Is like, those were the hobby standards in basketball and football. We finally got them in wrestling, but we also got this awesome stuff that came out of Immaculate and Impeccable and all these other things that I never thought would ever be possible.
I think it's funny. I think it's funny you mentioned the hate part, because just a year previously, they had taken over the UFC license, and UFC Prism came out, and it went to $1,800 a box.
Yes, it did.
And nobody said shit.
Yep.
Nobody cared, really. The UFC collector market, which I was firmly entrenched in, did not care. They either opened it or they did it. They said it was nice or it wasn't. They bought singles or they didn't. There wasn't this tribalism of, and I think that that's a bit because MMA cards really started only about 14 years prior with the first Topps round one set. They didn't have stuff dating back, 40s, 50s, 60s, all the way back. So you really didn't have the other side of the camp. But the collectors that collected Topps, they said, okay, they either collected Panini or they didn't. But there wasn't this outpouring of rage. It was more like a marveling. Like, I can't believe this stuff's $1,800 a box. But you had cards on that stuff for UFC. You had a couple fighters that were selling $3, $4, $5 grand for an autograph card. If you got the good ones that were really rare. So it's just weird. The wrestling market and the wrestling collectors, it's crazy. It's just always fisticuffs over stuff. And it really is old and new. That's what it is. Yeah. It's old and new, because the people that complain about Panini are still buying it. They're still buying it. And it's like the average Howard Stern hater listens for 4 hours a day, Even though they hate them, they still listen. So,
Howard Stern's still making $40 million a year, probably.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing, is that the people that hate on Panini are some of the biggest purchasers of it. It's hilarious.
Yeah. Oh, I personally hate Panini. I'll go on record to say that.
Me too. Yeah, it's like I couldn't stand them as a company. They've done terrible things.
But they made great cards. They are a god-awful company that needs to be wiped off the face of the earth, but they made great products.
Absolutely. I think that's about as well put as you can say about Panini, because like there are a lot of people who would love to see that red and yellow logo be gone forever. And if you go back to like 2009 and 2010, when they started doing similarly what Fanatics is doing right now, which is sort of consolidating licenses, They got football, they got basketball exclusive away from Upper Deck, who's this beloved company. No more Exquisite, no more SPA, no more any of these other things. People were literally losing their shit. And like now Panini's kind of taken that role of the Upper Deck, and like people have like of the Upper Deck spot in the hobby where they're like, we love Prism, we love Select, we love Immaculate and National Treasures. All of that's going to be taken away in 2026 or sooner. And I think that this whole consolidation plan breeds a ton of hate, but they've also had a ton of problems with customer service, sort of getting into the things that they maybe haven't done very well. But a lot of it in wrestling just hasn't had that. Wrestling's so much smaller, so much more focused, that a lot of the things that made Panini a terrible company in basketball and football really never touched wrestling, because the autographs were being facilitated really through a pretty tight process. There were a bunch of redemptions that ended up happening, but a lot of them have been filled. Like there's still some big names outstanding, but I mean, like the things that drove people crazy in basketball and football really haven't had the same impact in wrestling, especially from a product perspective with only 8 versus 40 or 50, right?
I like Panini. I like the products. I thought pre-COVID. I like how we refer to COVID now as like a time frame. So, I mean, it really is. But pre-COVID, some of those football products were great. I really enjoyed the football products. I did, because they were affordable. You had a chance of pulling some really nice stuff out of it. Basketball was the same. For those who joined the hobby in 2020 and later, you don't know what it was like before COVID, before the boom, where you had these products now that I saw like Panini Black is like $500 a pack.
Oh my God.
For Panini Black.
I know
stuff used to be like $100 some a pack. You know, all the stuff you see now, it was all a third, a fourth of what it is now. And at those prices, they were fun to open, and there was some great stuff in there.
And so I opened a shit ton of it. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was, the Johnny Manziel years in 2014, and then, going into 2018 and 2019 with the quarterback rookie class. I really enjoyed those years. But like I said, I think that whoever designed these products for Panini really cared. And that's one of the overarching things, is that they actually gave a shit.
Can I put an asterisk to what you just said?
Absolutely.
Panini wasn't greedy at that point. When COVID hit and the market exploded and they realized they could charge 6 times what the distributors were paying for the product and sell it direct, then they got greedy and then they got lazy. But before that, everything you said was correct. I used to buy cases upon cases upon cases of flawless basketball and football, $1,250 a box. It never went up, never went down. It was just MSRP. And that was some of the greatest stuff ever. Now you can't touch that stuff for $10,000 a box.
It's crazy.
Well, like National Treasures held firm at like $550 a pack.
Yes.
For years.
Yeah.
For
I remember when they did first off the line for the first time for National Treasures football, it was like $1,000. It's like, who would pay $1,000 for this stuff?
Yeah, but you know what? True story. I'm 13 years old in 1993. I'm going to my weekly flea market, and Topps Finest Baseball comes out, and someone says to me it's $5 a pack, and I go, "What the really?
What?" Yeah, I remember those days.
$5 a pack for one pack of cards, and then fast forward 20
but
years
that's
later.
That's where my love for Finest and Chrome really came from. It was the premium product,
right?
And like I loved that. I still have all of like the old Timberwolves and Vikings and Twins, their rookie cards from Chrome and Finest, because those were the cool cards. That's what drove my collecting back in those days.
I've got a 93 Finest McGuire refractor right here. I love it. It reminds me of my childhood. And then 10 years later, I'm at the National in, I think it's Cleveland, and I walk by, and Exquisite Basketball had just hit. LeBron James.
500, yeah.
And they go 500 a pack. I go, no one's going to buy that.
Remember that. I think we probably had a big fight over that on the blow-up forums at some point. But
we probably did.
Because I remember that
this morning, though, so I can't remember back that far.
Yeah, we're getting old. Yep. I think the thing with Panini that really drove a lot of interest is, you mentioned the photography. I think the photography, man, I talked to the guy who picks all the photos. He's one of the best. and he loves what he does, and it shows. And like more importantly, like the way the cards look with those photos, and Panini really does have some good design people now. They've hired a lot of the old Upper Deck and Topps guys, and like they've really sort of honed their craft for Prism and Select and Immaculate. Like, and when they find something that works, they stick to it. And for some people, like, well, this set doesn't change enough or whatever. For me, I think like you've got to keep those things that work really going well. But I also believe the way that those cards are received by collectors when you open a pack and you pull one of those golds, or when you open a pack and you ripped a bunch of the first off the line Immaculate Ben, I remember, like you were really loving what you were seeing. Like it was fun, right? And I think that's one of those things that Panini just does really, really well. Let's talk maybe about what Panini doesn't really do well. What are some of the things that, Ben, that you think they have completely failed at?
Number one on everybody's board across the nation is customer service.
Yeah,
they have by far the worst customer service outside of maybe some cable companies. I mean,
that's a good analogy.
I don't know how to. I could probably speak about an hour about Panini's customer service, but that is the worst thing they do. My second gripe is greed that I just mentioned. I mean, yes, they used to make great stuff. Now they make great stuff, but charge sometimes 10x what they used to do, and their costs are virtually the same.
Exactly, so, if not lower.
It just really hurts the mindset of the people that have been doing this forever. I mean, the people that came in after COVID, they're like, oh man, we can gamble and buy this $1,000 box of whatever. And they don't realize that box was $185, 2 years ago. And you could buy cases of it, but now they're shooting their shot on one box and get $30 worth of cards, and they don't come back to the hobby. That's the problem. Products are so overpriced now that the people that would stay in it, they'll buy, let's say, a one box of National Treasures football for $2,000 or $2,500. They don't even get an RPA. They get let's say their best card's a Barry Sanders autograph, which might get $125, $150. And they look at their investment. You get a couple $2 jerseys, maybe a $10 auto, and maybe a $20 auto, and so you got like a net of $200 out of $2,500, and that's just a tough pill to swallow. ROI has not been Panini's strong suit over the last few years. You got to basically hit a jackpot card to even break even or make a little bit of money. But
I think in wrestling is a little bit different because the Select boxes, the Prism boxes have really sort of settled in. $250 for Prism, like $150 for Select. Immaculate was really sort of the one that sort of held tight at like $400, $425 or whatever.
I was going off on a tangent as Panini as a whole. I'm sorry. I should have spoken more directly.
No, you're good. You're good, man. Because I think it gives a lot of really good context, because a lot of those concepts and a lot of those approaches really did sort of transfer over to people's mindset as they were approaching Panini. And that's where Prism, the original Prism release, really sort of fell victim to that. But afterwards, like you said, I think they kind of settled in and they were just churning out banger after banger. Right. And like, and that's where I think that value spectrum may be corrected a little bit. We're seeing a lot more closer to, like, Revolution wasn't going to be $225 a box. It was back down to like $60 and $75. Like NXT didn't keep at $200. It was down at $50 and $60 a box. Like, I think for wrestling, the sort of value scale has sort of evened out a little bit more, and the ROI really does sort of help in that regard. Go ahead, Ryan.
How much of that are we going to put on the distributors?
A lot. I think so. That's a really, really good point, because there is a distributor cost, and then there's Panini's cost that they put on their store for stuff like first off the line, and when they're selling the actual boxes. What really I don't get is, like, there's a dealer cost that's given to Blowout and Dave and Adams and all those guys, Steel City, wherever. And they just automatically marked it up without any real
5x'd it, like right off the bat.
Greed. It's greed.
Yeah,
it's a fair point.
We can sit here and talk about, and I'm not going to belabor the point that much because it's not really directed at Ben. It's more directed at people that just say the stuff's too expensive. Yeah, I get first off the line's expensive. Okay, that is something you can only get from Panini. Okay, that's like their own little special niche. You don't have to buy that. You can go buy a regular box if you want to. But if Prism's MSRP is $119 a box, and Blowout says, "I'll sell it
We're
to
gonna
you
put
for
an 800.
$1,200," that's not Panini's fault. That's not. That's a greedy distributor who, and Blowout used to be the shit. Like back in like 2008, 2009, like when they were first starting up, they really wanted to cut deals with you. I bought so much stuff at the National because they would just cut you a deal. Boom, boom, boom. Now, you can't buy anything
Because
anymore.
products back then were made to close out though. Like that was the thing. Like Blowout
True.
made their living because Panini would basically, or DLP at the time, or Topps or whoever, would have all of this extra product, and Blowout would just wait. They would be like, okay, we'll give it a week or two. It'll be available at 25% of the original cost. It'll close it all out. Panini would literally overprint stuff knowing that they could sell a huge portion of closeout to these guys like DA and Blowout and so on and so forth. That's where they found their footing. Now there is no closeout. Every product sells out regardless of the price. So there's no more ability to like say, okay, MSRP is 119 bucks. Well, at 119 bucks, Ben's buying what, 1,000 cases at least? Like that's a no-brainer in a lot of these cases for football, basketball, anything. So there is demand when there's a large market. But in wrestling, I think that's a niche, real niche audience, even with all the new people that Panini brought in. So the MSRP discussion is a little bit different there.
Well, we can also bring in the fact that breakers play a huge part in it too.
And
So,
Whatnot, yeah, Whatnot is a huge
we
wrestling
can
brand. Yeah,
argue that point left, right, top down if you want to, because you've got distributors, you've got breakers, you've got products that are made exclusively for breakers because nobody in the world can afford a box on their own. They need to get 30 people to chip in to buy it, and then they make their 10% or 20%. But that's a discussion for another day. I'm just saying, not all the hate that's thrown on Panini is deserved. It really isn't.
Oh, it goes to Fanatics too. I just, when they started selling it on their website so let's say we'll take Prism and Blowout sells it for 1,000. Well, then Prism puts it up on release day on their website for $1,000 or like $980, so they can be $20 cheaper or something.
yeah, that's the key. That's the weird thing. That's so weird to me.
I would agree with you there. I would think if they just stuck to first off the line and just sold first off the line on their own site, then you probably wouldn't have a gripe. But you do. If they're selling the exact same thing as in the shops, 2 weeks later. But still, I mean, then what the price fixing? I mean, not say it. I mean,
but you can't. You remember, like Blowout is still a gigantic store for people to buy cards, right?
Right.
DA still moves a ton of products, so Panini can't like shut them off and say, "Oh, we're gonna offload all of this product at MSRP on our website." It would really shake some wrong cages the wrong way. But I think like moving away from the product point back to the ROI, because I think that's a really key one. People originally were deservedly upset with a 200 or 300 card checklist for Prism, humongous autograph checklist. You bust one box, the chance that you're going to pull something good at $1,200 that makes your money back, little to none. I've actually stopped ripping wax. Like I was the worst degenerate out there. I was ripping case after case. I've had to stop because it's not feasible anymore when I'm only collecting one person. And wrestling collectors are notorious for only collecting certain things. So putting them at sort of at odds with how they collect is really difficult. I think that was one of the things that Topps really nailed was like, we're going to put out $40 and $60 boxes until the cows come home. People are just going to rip through case after case after case because one box of Panini equals an entire case of Top stuff. Like that's where I think the mentality of people coming into the Panini world in 2022, like people were thinking, well, I'm priced out. I can't rip boxes at $60 anymore. Not realizing that the Top stuff had already gone up, a ton of money. You couldn't find a $60 Chrome box anymore. Ben, you bought a case of Chrome at what, like $120 a box? And you were like, holy shit, this is an amazing price, right? Like things change.
Things do change. I've very curious to see what products they come out with when the license goes back over. If they stick with the staple of Chrome Finest, hopefully Transcendent, but I hope they only do one, maybe two of those little paper products. They had too many of them. They had the SmackDown, the WrestleMania, Road to WrestleMania, the all-female one. I mean, they had too many 50
women's division. Yeah.
Yeah, you gotta, I think you make one or two low-end brands tops, and well, no pun intended, but yeah, one or two
Yeah.
maximum, and do more premium stuff.
Especially now that you've got the idea, because it used to be Topps wasn't able to do the things that Panini was doing. I don't think we ever saw player worn stuff go in Topps products. It was always something that was tied to events, and people are like, "Well, we want that. We want the gear. We want this. We want that." Well, go look at the prices of Fully Loaded. Fully Loaded had wrestler gear in it. Like, go look at the products that had those shirts. They're not any more expensive than buying the logo cards from Immaculate, right? Like, there's no correlation in the greater hobby to tying relics to specific things. Panini for a while was saying we want to do Eminence and we want to get a Charlotte Flair robe, or we want to get this or that, the other thing. The value of that product is in the box. It's not necessarily that the relic is ring worn, because there's ring worn stuff that exists already. It's not any more expensive than the relics in Immaculate, which have worn for 2 seconds, right? So I think like those are the types of situations where people just have a complete misunderstanding of things.
Unless you get an iconic piece. Transcendent one year did a Sting autograph with a shard of the bat from WrestleMania. Now that card has kind of kept going and transcended most.
It's a great card.
Yeah, I mean, but that was one example. Like, if they were to take very specific relics that people would be like, okay, yeah, I remember when Sting fought at WrestleMania. It was like the only one he did, right?
That's the type of thing. Like, there needs to be moment based cards, right?
We don't
I think
need a
Panini
bunch
did
of
a really.
magnets.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's transition into Topps now. I think this is where I think we're going to get a lot of people sort of wondering, okay, what's going to happen with Fanatics when they eventually come back and bring Topps back into the fold? But also, like, what drove so many people to be such rabid fans of what Topps was doing? So let's start, like, Ben, what do you think Topps's legacy was prior to them losing that license? Like, what drove people to become, and no pun intended, fanatics of Topps and what they were producing in wrestling cards? Specifically, my focus has always been 2013 to 2021. That was kind of the ultra modern era for me. But I'm curious, like, what did it, even going back to the old Heritage Chrome and the old Heritage sets and the old Top sets from the turn of the century? Like, what do you think drove that initial sort of legacy that they have, and sort of what brought it to where it was at the end of their license?
I'll speak from personal experience. It was an extremely niche market, right? I mean, you almost knew pretty much everybody that collected if they were remotely vocal about it. You can't say that for any other sport or segment, especially at this point. The boxes were affordable. I'll put Undisputed out there as an example. You got 10 hits per box. On average, it was like $200, give or take, when it come out. So maybe 250.
It's my favorite, yeah.
Yeah, so Undisputed was like all on card autos, relics, and all that stuff, and nice thick stock. It was a cool product, but as a whole, for me, what happened is, as a lifelong wrestling fan, I got burned out buying football, basketball, baseball, all that, and I was like, you know what? It gets redundant to rip this stuff over and over and over again. I'm not having fun, and I started thinking about what in my life would be fun to open. Well, being a lifelong wrestling fan, I started opening wrestling cards, and I would enjoy opening packs and looking at base cards. I never looked at base cards before. I would just literally throw them in a pile, and I found myself looking at them, reading the backs of them, and just actually enjoying the product. It didn't matter if it was a $40 box or a $200 box. Like, it was just fun. And I think that wrestling fans in general, as they found out about that there were wrestling cards out there, much like Star Wars or Marvel or whatever else is out there that's enjoyable, and then you find out there's a huge collecting base of people that would share the same interest as you, and it was a very interesting community. So a lot of jealousy, but
That's an easy way of putting it. Sure.
but very fun. I've had more fun in wrestling cards than I have in any other segment of the hobby ever,
Yeah.
and still do to this day, even though it's so much bigger than it was 2 or 3 years ago.
You literally just you literally just told my collecting story as well, and I think that's for a lot of us who collected the football and basketball stuff. Like I stopped having fun with it. Like I used to have a gigantic football collection, a gigantic baseball collection. All of it's gone. I focus almost entirely on wrestling now because it's fun, like you said. Now, my kids also enjoy it too, so it's cool to open the packs with them, and they get to see wrestlers that they cheer for on TV and stuff like that too. So there's a tie there. Although now my oldest is into baseball more than anything, and so going back to that might be something we do. But yeah, you said it right there. I think also you mentioned sort of the product lines. I know you had really built up a collection of the superfractors for a while, and because it was something that you saw as really the premier card in the hobby, and this was prior to Panini coming in, but also some time after as well. Like, do you think that drove a lot of where you were coming from as a collector?
Uh, coming from both sides of it as a collector and a seller, I was looking and seeing that people just didn't care about the superfractor. Like they existed in their bubble, and the superfractor was cool. It was a 101, but it wasn't historic like it is in other sports. It would be like if a Upper Deck PMG existed and then nobody cared about it in something else. I just saw value there. I'm not going to lie. If superfractors are going to be that cheap, I'm going to buy them.
Yeah.
And very quickly, they did not become cheap anymore.
Because you were buying them. No, I'm just kidding. So Ryan,
to this day, if you give me a choice between a superfractor or Prism Black, I'm taking the superfractor every time.
I do too.
Yes.
I literally think that
Me too.
the
They're my
design,
favorite, yeah.
the gold circle design is the preeminent design for a 101, and that's going to be another thing that happens. Let's say Topps gets Panini's IP. You know, the black 101 is Panini's thing. Topps has always been the superfractor. What do they do? Do they move the black to 10 like it is on everything else? I don't know.
That's a great question. I think in the legacy of the superfractor, like I've always been a chrome baby. Like I grew up as a young kid collecting chrome and finest, as I've already said, and like the superfractor wasn't a thing originally. It didn't come in until much later on in the run, but I own 6 of them for my collection. Like I've literally chased them down to the ends of the earth, and because I love them so much, I love them more than the Prism Blacks. The Prism Blacks will always be more valuable. The Prism Blacks have just become this beast and monster that we can't control anymore. But the Superfractors, it's unlike anything I've ever seen before, and it's something that most people set aside in a different echelon of collecting. Like it is if you have one of those on your collection, like you've made it, right? Especially the transcendent ones. So I'm curious to see if they bring those back, right? People have, and at one point, I mean, there was a few of us who had owned all of these transcendent cards, these Superfractor 101s, and we're like, maybe we start like a club, like it's the VIP club of wrestling, right? But Ryan, if you had to think about this from Topps' perspective, like, and you're looking at it from the way that you've existed in the hobby as well, like, what do you see when you think about when you hear Topps wrestling? Like what brings you back to that sort of initial phase of your collecting journey in wrestling, but also sort of your ongoing existence?
I was a big Undisputed fan. I love Undisputed. And we had a group of guys at the shop that we would just rip pack after box after case of it, just over and over and over again. My first wrestling product was 98, the duo card comic images WWF Superstars. That was my first product. I really got into the Fleer era. I did a lot of Fleer, did a lot with that. And then I kind of drifted out of it and was back into sports and going back and forth. And then I came back into Undisputed. That for me, like I would love to see that set come back. I would love to see that
I
set come
think
back.
I think it will. I think it
Yeah,
absolutely has.
I think it's. I don't want to see it at $500 a box. I want to see it, $300 a box, maybe. I don't know. But like Ben said, that was one of the best values. It was $200 a box. It was 10 packs. Two of them were shirt cards, and then the other 8 were all autographs. And that was the set that really got me back into wrestling cards, was the undisputed sets. And then you had Chrome, and Chrome was fun. And it's funny to think back to these times. Like, they were simpler times, right? It's just we
Yeah.
didn't have going from tops to Panini back to tops and having to talk about comparisons and everything else. I did think that towards the end there it got stale. The one thing I think that we kind of missed out on is that Tops was really making a really high end push with Transcendent, and they were killing it. I mean, those were great
Oh,
sets.
that's so good. Yeah,
I just
all
picked
three
up.
of them.
I just picked up a Vince McMahon Transcendent autograph because I didn't have one, and I kind of was like of the mindset. Adam, you and I talked about this. We don't know what Vince's involvement with WWE is going to be going forward, if he's ever going to sign again. So I went ahead and picked one up. It was pricey, but I picked one up. And I really, if they had extended past 20, 21,
21.
it was 21, right? Where could they have gone? Would we have seen Sapphire, Chrome Sapphire wrestling? I think we will now when it goes back to Fanatics.
Exactly. Like, those are the types of things that I think drove people to Tops, right? Like, that's why, like, it was the fun of that piece of it. You said it was a simpler time, right? I remember I ripped 18 cases of Heritage because it was $40 a box. Like, it's like, how can you miss? There's on-card autographs. Like, that was the other thing that Tops did really, really well. Even for their low end stuff, they still had found ways to make on-card autographs, right? So, like, Heritage had on-card autographs. We saw on-card autographs in like the 2021 Tops and Road to WrestleMania, and like all those other things. Like, Panini just, I think, relied initially on stickers because they were, yeah, exactly.
I can't even
Transcendent. Yeah, Transcendent
Love
was
it.
awesome.
Awesome.
The framed cards, like, they're so cool. Like, I think overall, like, Undisputed, like you guys said, was one of my favorite products, but Transcendent is like the cream of the crop. To this day, even with all the Panini hype, there has never been a more expensive wrestling product. It will forever sit atop that mountain. And if Fanatics brings it back, it's going right back to the top of the mountain. And I think, Ben, I know you've ripped personal cases where most of us are buying into group breaks. Like, you're somebody that's actually found a way to find value in selling those to collectors like me and other things like that, because Transcendent is the Bentley of wrestling cards, right? It's not even that. It's the Bugatti if you really look at it.
A Bentley doesn't give it credit. I mean, they make 50 total boxes a year. 50.
Yeah, exactly.
For the world. And I was lucky enough, because there was not enough people in the space willing to put money up to just order personal cases every single year. And my friend Jameson will tell you, there has been no better ROI product on the face of the earth than the last year of Transcendent.
Yep.
And even the first year was great. But I mean, when they put those garbage pail kids 8 bucks in,
so awesome. Yeah.
I think historically those are going to just be monsters. I know they're being hoarded by a small group of people.
The roadshow guys, yeah.
At one point in time, I think I had 8 or 9 of them, and
it was tough to pry those away from you, though.
Yeah, it was, but because they were works of art. I mean, I appreciate a great painting and a great sketch, and I know at one point in time, Topps had Jerry Lawler doing sketches, and they somehow didn't release them. And I don't know if that was some sort of licensing or what.
So they had him in 1 year of Undisputed, but they didn't. They were gonna do it. So the year that the second year of Transcendent, Lawler was, because they had Schamberger for the first year. Then second year was going to be Lawler, and third year now we see is GPK. Lawler, for whatever reason, I think he was sick or something happened where he wasn't able to get the cards done, and they went to their in-house sketch guy who did great work. Like, I love his sketches anyways. So I don't want to shit on what he did because I own all of them, and like they're great cards, but it's not Jerry Lawler, it's not Rob Schamberger, and it's not GPK. but they're good looking cards. And I think that's what sets Transcendent apart is they offered content that really has never been offered any other places, right? We had literally like the four horsewomen card, like that I have the 101 in my shelf. Like that card is a jumbo framed card with 4 on card autographs. It wasn't until Immaculate this past year that we had another on card 4 autograph card released. And Panini was offering that in a $400 box, but Topps was offering that in a $12,000 box into these oversized things. They look great on a shelf. Like that's what Transcendent was all about. But even going down to like the base top set, the Road to WrestleMania, even like I remember the booklet they made for WrestleMania 35, like that was awesome. And it was this $40 box. It's like a $50 box, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like those are the things that I think Topps really did well. But to Ryan's point, the checklist like just really hurt a lot of those areas. They were SP to all hell for Bliss and Becky and Roman and all those guys. Like they really started cutting down. We'll get to what Topps needed to work on, but go ahead.
The one thing that Topps failed where Panini succeeded, in my opinion, is let's say a wrestler debuted, aka The Fiend. Use him as an example. If The Fiend debuted in March, he did not have a card till January of the next year.
Yeah.
Now with Panini, you got somebody called up in NXT in January, and they've got a card in a product by March. And it's not just like a silhouette on a wall, it's them in a ring doing something. So
they did really good with that.
Panini cared about putting rookie cards or cards of new wrestlers out while the iron was hot, or before the iron even was presented on the table. And Topps dropped the ball, especially with The Fiend. I mean, I think that was the big example. There was no card of him for forever.
And Alexa Bliss, even like when she switched over to her, like I think they maybe got 1 or 2 out before they lost the license, but she was like because the production timelines for Topps were so much longer, it seemed. Panini's timelines were really tight. I mean, they were like like you said, getting cards in and out of products really quickly. I think that what Panini did really well in that respect, as well as they brought hobby standards like rookie cards, like you were saying with the relics and everything like that. Really good point, because I think Topps didn't focus on that as much. They were just kind of like, we got to get these out. We got to hit our minimum guarantees. It kind of showed, especially in 2019, was probably the worst year of wrestling cards ever produced. And like when they got to 2021, like some of the things you could tell, like they were just trying to get through the end of the license. And meanwhile, their cards were booming because Panini was announced. People were coming in. They were like, oh, here comes Prism. We got to go collect all the top stuff and whatever. So you had this giant like spike leading up. Drake bought the Roman Reigns Superfractor for 15 grand. Like all of that stuff happened at the end of the license. Meanwhile, Topps is kind of phoning it in. And I think that was, you saw those checklists. They were the same guys over and over again. It was like 10 signers, current guys, or 10 legends, maybe. You had maybe 20 or 30 guys from the current roster, and it was always the same mid-card, low-card guys. It wasn't the big names like Brock Lesnar or Ronda Rousey, or who was big at the time. It wasn't those guys. And if you pulled somebody like Bliss, it was SP to 50 or below. Like a lot of that stuff just didn't sit right with collectors. We look back on it fondly now. And again, some of the things that I'm calling back to that Sports Card Nonsense podcast, they're like, everything is always looked back on fondly. Like when it's going on, people were pissed. And like, I think that like, it's so hard for us to look back on this and say, wow, Topps really fucked up on some of these things, especially if you look at that 9-month period during COVID where they released Road to WrestleMania in January. And then it was like until October before they had another wrestling product out. And like that timeline happened again the next year, even though COVID really hadn't impacted things. Like there were things like that people were upset as hell. And I think the redemptions and just the last year of Undisputed, I mean, there's tons of them. Like all of those things were major issues that Topps was finding, you know, to be a challenge for them. And people just have seemingly forgotten. We've looked back on it fondly. We love Chrome. We love Finest. We love all this stuff, not realizing the challenges that they face in getting stuff out of that. Chrome boxes went up to what, like $280 at one point? Like, you can't, it's not sustainable, right?
There's a $1 million question that ties both of these together. So when Topps gets that license back, are they going to look back at this 2 years of what Panini did and say, you know what, our competition actually A, grew the space, B, put out some incredible content, and C, are they going to follow that playbook and adapt some of those things into their own products? Or are they going to say, to hell with them, that's Panini, they suck, and we're just going to follow what we used to do? I, for one, hope that they absorb,
it's a combo,
make it a combo to make it a more powerful product that they put out. And I think ultimately we're going to enter a space where you're going to have to put out some good products, because there's a lot of people that are just, they're tired of pissing away money. And I'm starting to see not every product's going up on day of release. Things are going down again. So the products are going to start having to be better to last.
That's a good point. But also worth mentioning, and I talked about this with Ryan as well, the cost of Topps's license was a third of what Panini is paying for it right now. So Panini, from the license document and the court filings we saw, what was it, Ryan? Like $5.6 million for 2 years. So it's like what, like a $10 million contract? Topps was like a third of that, I'm guessing. So now Fanatics is coming in on top of that at the same money that Panini's paying. You think they're going back to this old way of doing business? I don't think they can. Ryan, you've talked about this a lot on our videos.
Well, I think that Topps has seen that the wrestling market now can handle that. That's one thing that Panini did well, is they ushered in a high premium product era for wrestling cards. And Topps needs to continue that. They need to. They can't go back to, they won't go back. I've said this before numerous times. We're not getting $60 Chrome boxes. We're not getting $50 Topps boxes. We may get one. We may get one. It may just be a base Topps product that's $50 or $60. It's because some guy and his kid want to open a box. That's fine. But Panini has shown that the wrestling hobby, can withstand a $200 box, a $300 box, a $500 pack, and they will open it if it's a good product.
If it's good.
If it's a good product. My fear is that they try to replicate the stuff with those prices and they fall short of the quality.
Okay.
That's my personal fear with Topps cards. Now, I haven't opened a hobby box since 2019. So to me, I don't care. You guys can open it all you want. I'll pick the singles off of the stuff I want. So that's great. But people aren't going to open it if it's not good. And they need to make a conscious effort to make good products. And I don't know, with a company as big as Fanatics, with so many burning irons going on, that they can devote the kind of
great point
one-on-one attention that this license is going to need to thrive. And we may just go back to regular cookie cutter Topps. And that's my fear.
Well, if you
want
want
to be seen,
the Star Wars IP, that, for example, I open a lot of Star Wars, so I've seen this. The products are getting worse and worse, and they're churning out triple the products in Star Wars they have in previous years. They're milking that IP to death, and the odds of you getting any signer that is even remotely good is astronomical. It's almost like a 1 in 50 case hit at this point. Where,
well, I remember watching people open Masterworks and just being like, oh my God, you are spending $50 a pack for the guy who shoved his hand up the puppet's ass in Return of the Jedi. Like, that literally was in there.
Better autos.
I was watching it and it's like, okay, maybe once in a while you got like a Billy D. Williams and it was kind of cool. And maybe once in a blue moon you saw a Carrie Fisher, but just box after box after box. And then $55 a pack and you get a medallion card. Yeah. You shitting me?
And I hope that they don't go that route. Like that was their version of Undisputed.
Right.
It was literally the only other Topps product that even remotely mirrored Undisputed. But I hope that we don't go into, whoring out the IP. And
I don't think they will. I don't think they're going to whore it out. But that is a fear, and I think where I see them struggling is Panini has a throng of loyal fans, and I think the eyes outside of wrestling cards that were attracted to those Rock cards and to those Stone Cold Steve Austin cards that Panini sold for, that Panini's products contained and were sold on auction houses for 10 grand, 100 grand, whatever. Like until you get the Rock to sign a card, like it's going to be really hard to achieve the level of outside audience for a Topps product as you would for a Panini product. And that's sad because I think Topps does have really good products. Like I said, I collect a ton of what they've put out, but I just don't think it's niche with Topps. It's nostalgia with Topps. It's not, the value and the driving the investment side that Panini really has sort of made their brand in basketball and football. Now, for wrestling, people are like, well, I don't want that in wrestling. Well, you kind of do because you want people to open the boxes. You want people to sell the cards so you can have a chance at them as a personal collection to obtain them. If no one's ripping, if no one's selling, or if they're going for crap, like it doesn't have the same impact that it would. And I just don't see the audience transferring the way that it has for Panini into the new Topps type of world that we would be living in come 26 if the lawsuit doesn't work or work soon. Like, so if they do a Topps Dynasty or if they do Luminaries or, wrestling icons or whatever they want to call their port over products from baseball, like those may bring some of that audience back. But I think releasing base Topps, releasing Undisputed, releasing all those, that's going to appeal to the wrestling collectors that were there before. And I just don't think there were enough of them. Like it's just not a big enough audience.
You need
so when you start,
need high end premium products. You do, because that's the market we're in now for all the sports. There's like these $40 boxes. Those days are gone, and that doesn't excite people. People don't want that. People want to drop $200-300 on a box and hit something big. It's the gambling mentality. It's the jackpot mentality. I'm pulling the lever. I don't want to win. I don't want to win 50 cents on my 25 cents. I want to win 5,000 on my 100. That's what I want to win. And it's just like Zan says, with the ecosystem of the hobby, you have to have people open it. There has to be high end stuff. They have to open it. The singles have to hit the market. You got to buy the singles, commerce, everything else. It all works in one big ecosystem. You can't have one without the other. Yeah, you want to buy all the singles, but you need people to open it. For people to open it, there has to be some kind of value there. And you're right. If they're going to kick back to the old products of 2019, 2020, it's only going to appeal to a certain amount of people. And if they're not good, those people are going to go away really quickly. Really quickly.
More importantly than that, because there's going to be people out there who are going to see us talking. It's like, well, we don't want that in wrestling cards. That gatekeeping bullshit has kept people out of wrestling cards and not given it. It's like wrestling is a worldwide billion follower type of thing. Like there should be F1 value in this. There should be value like we see in UFC and F1 and soccer and all those other things because a lot of people love wrestling. That gatekeeping bullshit has really hurt things. And it's not just because wrestling isn't an official sport or whatever. It's because it was never really an audience that was going to go and do the things that other people in cards were doing. Like there's correlations there. There's lines to draw between one and the other. And if you don't have that, it doesn't grow. Nothing happens that's of interest. You don't get better autographs, better signers, more of those autographs, more of those signers. You don't get the relics. You don't get the Rock. You don't get Stone Cold Steve Austin the same way. Like Rock will not sign cards for Topps unless Topps can make it profitable. It has nothing to do with the Rock. It has everything to do with the amount of money it's going to take for him to sign cards and adjust his schedule to do it. And if there's no audience, if there's no real reason to bring that to products, Topps doesn't need to do it, right? There's one begets the other. It's a chicken and the egg type of situation, especially with the license now costing what it does.
The other problem is, if you remember, Tom Brady started signing for Panini about a year or two ago, and they were putting like 5 cards on an entire product. There were 5 Tom Brady autographs, or there were 10
Tom wasn't many.
Autographs. And people are like, okay, that's cool, but I have no shot at hitting that. I have no shot of hitting that. So if they're going to get the Rock, he's got to sign hundreds of cards per product to make it to the point where people can actually pull one, and not have to pay $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 for it. And before we get any, I want to address redemptions too, because if people don't, I understand the Panini redemption issue. You got to remember too, it's the company that was blindsided in court proceedings who are not allowed to continue at some point. Okay. If you don't think there's going to be redemptions and tops, then I don't know what to tell you, because there's going to be redemptions and tops. There's absolutely going to be redemptions. There's going to be redemption problems.
Following the same process too of getting those autographs that Panini is currently following too.
And if you don't think tops, they don't. How do I phrase this? They don't care if you get it or not. Like, that's my opinion. It's. I mean, I know that's going to sound controversial. We were going to jump my ass about that, but they've got so much going on that they'll get to it when they get to it. Now, I think you'll get it eventually, but this little vocal minority of the wrestling collectors that are like, we want our redemptions. They're like, okay, you know, we'll get them when we get them.
But it's a small, and Ben, we've talked about this a number of times because I know you've faced a lot of adversity from the community in some of the situations you've been in too. Like, we've talked about that tiny little group of people that exist only to burn things to the ground. They just want to watch that world burn. Like, but it's also, that's not the greater hobby. Like, Ben and I have had conversations at these transcendent events at WrestleMania with people who would never show their collection publicly. Like, they just don't exist in the public fashion, but they love wrestling cards, right? And I think that's the thing. Like, we can't let the vocal minority of these tiny group of people saying, well, we don't want expensive stuff in wrestling. We don't want this. We don't, because that's not the way most of us function. Like, if you go on Facebook, if you go on all these other places, it's
the market's going to shut them out, because that's not how the market is now. And that's not, do you think Fanatics is getting this license back to make $50 boxes?
No, they can't. It's a different cost for the license overall. They need to have more expensive stuff.
It's such an asinine viewpoint to have that, where they think it's going to go back to 2014 and they can buy boxes for $50.
Are they saying that on the Facebook and all that? Is that what the opinion is?
It's on Twitter. Yeah, it's on Twitter and all these videos of people like, well, we don't want this or whatever. I get it. Like, no one wants to spend more than what they feel something is worth. Like, that makes sense.
I do want to touch on one thing, and it's a little out of left field, but I've been watching this in baseball lately, and as you are well aware, Fanatics operates a sports book. So they are a gambling company at core.
Yep.
I mean, and so what they've done to drive some of their baseball products lately, during this slight downturn, is they're issuing bounties on their own cards. They put a $200,000 bounty out on a Babe Ruth superfractor. They accidentally misprinted dual superfractors for a lot of people in Bowman Chrome, and they issued upwards of $30,000 bounties on some player, and they actually did a tiered system, which
75 grand. 75 grand on Ethan Salas.
Yeah, so you're well aware. And so the biggest one, here's the biggest one. If you have a taco fractor, wait till taco fractors come to wrestling. They're coming. Don't doubt that. If you have a taco fractor of the person who steals the first base in the World Series, and there's 5 of them, you can redeem it for a $15,000 Taco Bell gift card and almost $6,000 in cash to cover the taxes on the gift card.
Oh my God.
So with all that being said, I'm kind of scratching my head. I'm like, what are they going to do with this in wrestling? Because I think they're going to adapt this whole gambling and bounty mentality.
And they have a live breaking platform to make it work too. Like,
right.
Fanatics Live is contributing to all of this.
So they're big into gambling and bounties and all this. And they figured out a new way to move product, which is like, okay, well, if we don't think this is going to sell out, we're just going to drop a bounty on it, and everybody's going to rip boxes.
People will rip it, yeah.
So what do they do with that in wrestling? Are they going to start giving away like trips to WrestleMania, or meeting wrestlers? Like they did that deal with Victor Wembanyama. If you had one of the 99 green autos of his, a redemption, they invited everybody to San Antonio.
It's a great point. Yeah.
One person got to get the very first ever on-card auto from Wembanyama from him directly. They literally had him hand the collector the card. Those are the type of experiences Fanatics have started doing, which honestly is kind of cool. It's different. Upper Deck wasn't putting $200,000 bounties on Michael Jordan autographs. I mean, they didn't have the money to do so, but We're entering a new gambling realm. Like if you thought cards were gambling before, it's getting a lot worse in the coming future.
That is a really, really good point. And here's why I think this is such an important factor in this conversation. The goal of bringing value to a product is more people who want it. Like if you don't have people want a card, a pack, a box, a case, the value goes down. It's supply and demand, basic capitalism. You got to be liquid, bro. And like the whole situation is like if you're not able to have the supply and demand through normal means because there's this artificial bubble around, the tulip bubble around, hey, I got to get this card, I got to have this, I got to invest in this. And even though there's no real face value of that item, it's a piece of cardboard with a picture on it. Like people have assigned value to that quote unquote asset, right? So if you don't have that because things are dipping and the high end stuff in the hobby is down 60%, football's down 70%, all of that stuff is dropping like a rock. But the middle is holding, right? The middle is holding, the lower stuff is holding a little bit. And the reason is because there's still a lot of people who just want to buy cards for fun. So adding in a way to bring more gambling to it, which drives demand, it drives value, it drives all these things. Like that's what Fanatics is here to do. They're here to make cards accessible to the greater group of people out there, the casual fan. That's what they're all about. They also want to bring a ton more people into this because the leagues all have stakes in Fanatics. The WWE shop is run by Fanatics. All of these deals depend on them bringing a ton of extra people into this fold. And I don't think that happens unless they do kind of what Ben is saying. I think the audience is going to drop significantly without Panini around, but Fanatics has ways, as you just explained, they can bring it right back up, especially offering trips. Maybe they rent out Stone Cold's ranch or something like that, and this is the first on card. Or the one thing, and I've gone back to this time and time again, there is still another chance of a really giant card in wrestling, and that is the 1-of-1 Rock Superfractor autograph. If they can make that card and do something with the Rock is the golden, he is chasing the dragon. We've all been chasing that dragon for 20 plus years now. The Rock has to be it. And Panini, I thought Panini was going to be able to do it. They didn't have enough time, but especially because their end was announced the day they began. But Fanatics is in a position here to have a long run with WWE. It's time to get the Rock.
It's one phone call from Michael Rubin. That's all it takes.
Yeah, exactly right.
Rubin throws the most lavish A-list parties, period, in our current 2023. Michael Rubin is the only non-celebrity that has all celebrity friends. If you don't think he has the Rock in his cell phone, you're a fool.
You are absolutely wrong.
All he has to do is make one phone call. That's it. No. So they can do it. It's just a matter of, does he want to pull the string or not?
Yeah, and that's the type of thing that I think we're going to need to sort of get used to. This isn't the Topps of old. This is Fanatics Topps. And I think people absolutely need to differentiate what Fanatics Topps is versus what Topps is. Like I have a ton of friends at Topps. I love all the things that they've done, and I've been a huge Topps fan for a while because I think those guys really do have the best interest of the hobby at heart. However, those are not the people that are in charge of the greater sort of hobby strategy anymore. Fanatics is this giant conglomerate sitting over top of them, and Fanatics has an interest in growing this niche market. All right, I want to wrap up here because we've been on for a while here, and go ahead.
Real quick, I just want to say one thing real quick. I will say that I've had a multi-year redemption going on with Top/Fanatics, and I'm getting somewhere with it. And it really seems like from what the emails I'm getting, I'm a priority. And that's so this is the turn that Fanatics brings the customer service aspect to it. Because honestly, once I got a hold of the right guy with this redemption, it's been fantastic. I've got no complaints. Now we'll see if the end is what I want it to be. I think it will. But this has been the most positive redemption experience I've ever had, honestly. And
let's hope that continues.
Hope so. And I think that Fanatics, that's one of the biggest things. You got to make great cards that people want, but you got to be there to support those products as well. And
Absolutely.
my experience so far with Fanatics has been really good. So let's just hope that's it.
Good.
Okay. So Ryan, I know you wanted to talk about a big announcement that you have in partnership with Tony and the Wrestling Guy store in Phoenix. I want to give you an opportunity to talk about that because it's really cool. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Tony Vella, who owns WrestlingTradingCards.com, and you see him on these videos on this channel, and this is his, he's part of the OGs of this channel. He has a wrestling themed store in Phoenix called the Wrestling Guy Store in Phoenix. He is having on November 11th Kurt Angle in store for a public signing. He's been
So
having
awesome.
signings every month since he opened in January, and every one of them has gotten increasingly more traffic. He had Sabu just a couple weeks ago, and it was crazy. It was crazy busy. The Kurt Angle buzz around here, for people that know about it, it's been really high. He has what he's doing is for Angle, which nobody does anymore. He is offering autographs at one price, no matter the item. So some of these things you see, an autograph is $50, but a belt is $150, and a rookie card is $700. That's not it. $50. $50 for Kurt Angle, and then there's VIP experiences if you're going to be in town for it. So November 11th, go to his Instagram page, go to Twitter. I mean, it's all over the place. If you follow us, and you'll get the information there for mail order and mail in. So you can go to I think it's WGSPHX.com to order your package for the Kurt Angle signing. So it's going to be big. $50 is an unbeatable price.
That's amazing
for Kurt Angle. So go on his site, get your ticket reserved, get your item mailed in, and I will be there helping them with that stuff come November 11th. So big
awesome.
news. Spread the word because it's a big signing and it's a great price.
Awesome. Ben, where can they find you? Any closing thoughts here?
You can find me where you find me. But no, my closing thoughts are I wish the best and I cautiously optimistic about it.
It's a good way of putting it.
Not really sold on the Fanatics leadership of yet, but all this I kind of like. I'm not gonna lie, I kind of like this little bounty stuff. I think I am a gambler at heart. Otherwise, I wouldn't rip case after case. But I do kind of like that aspect coming to cards. I know it's not the most wholesome thing, and it's probably not great for the kids. It'll be an interesting time. Bring Topps Transcendent back because I'm ready to rip another case. I cannot wait for that. That's the one product I want to see again.
Yeah, Ryan.
I'm just going to follow suit with everybody else. I just said, like I previously said on other videos, I just hope they do it justice. I hope they do it justice and they have this, they continue the upward trajectory. I think they will. Hopefully they can maintain it. That's where I'm going with that. So that's it. You can find me on Instagram at Non-Sport Showcase.
And I am Adam Gelman at WWE Gelman on Instagram, at SCE Uncensored on Twitter. I'm never calling it X. And I think here's the thing. I love Topps Wrestling. I love Panini Wrestling. I don't care who's making cards. I would love to see both of them making cards. I think there's a lot of stuff at play with the consolidation plan. I don't like that. I don't like what Fanatics is doing, hoarding everything. I want there to be more options out there. But I love Chrome. Chrome is my favorite product of all time. I love Transcendent. I am excited for that to come back. I still don't think it's fair that Panini is looked at with such a negative lens for some of these people because they've done some absolutely tremendous stuff in wrestling. So anyways, again, stay tuned to this channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. We're going to be covering a ton of stuff coming up, especially now that we've got more stuff going through the court system and stuff. There's going to be a lot to cover here. Stay tuned. Can't wait to cover it. Ben, thank you so much for joining us again. Ryan, always a pleasure. We'll talk to you guys soon.